and he became the temple president first in Laguna Beach, is still current, and also in Long Beach and Encinitas. He opened a restaurant called Ahimsa. We're all very familiar with that term here in Gita Nagari. I remember that it was one of the first, probably the first and the only temple where you could get Ahimsa prasadam or vegan, because we took a vow earlier and wouldn't eat anything that wasn't Ahimsa. So Laguna Beach was the only option besides cooking for oneself. Tukaram has been preaching Krishna consciousness quite successfully. He's a very good speaker for many years. And this is a privilege to have him here today. We gave him a topic which is concurrent, coincidentally is the appearance of Lord Varahadeva. So, but don't feel circumscribed to just that topic, since you have such a wide range of things to approach. And if something is in your mind, or you feel inspired to tell us about other things, please go ahead and move forward. So thank you. You take it away.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Sarvatma Prabhu. You're a dear friend, and I'm really honored and excited to be able to support you and the devotees in Gitanagari. I'm just going to talk about Varahadeva. It seems appropriate considering it's Varahadvadasi. And it's a challenging topic. Yes, it would definitely not be on my list of easiest things to explain to a newcomer. And so I was excited about the opportunity. I don't always speak on Varahadvadasi, so it's exciting for me. And I think we'll stick pretty close to the topic at hand. I'm on record because it's being recorded. I'm on record saying we were the first temple in the world in all of ISKCON to be 100% ahimsa. It doesn't mean we're the first temple to be vegan. There's probably a vegan temple out there, but we were the first temple to only offer ghee, butter, paneer, milk yogurt, milk sweets, et cetera, never stop that worship, but do it all with our own cows and not bring in anything from outside. I checked with the Manor, we beat them. I checked with Shivaram Maharaj's people in Hungary, we beat them. I checked with Vrindavan and Mayapur, we beat them. We beat Gitanagari, we beat New Vrindavan, we beat everybody. We were the first, our little temple in Southern California, and I'm proud of it. Radhanath Maharaj and his team followed suit pretty quickly thereafter, but part of that was because I was getting on their case about it. And I know that Gitanagari is really big into cow protection. And, we're not big. We're small. We're a little seaside temple in Southern California. And the temple in Long Beach is also another small seaside temple. And our farm in Escondido is a small farm. But yeah, we feel really strongly about cow protection. And we've been looking after cows for the last 20 years almost. And all the dairy for the last, I think it's 17 years, maybe 18 years at our temple has come from protected animals only, without a break for the last, whatever it is, 17, 18 years. So Sarvatma threw that accolade at me, and it's something that we're really, really proud of, and we feel really good about. Knowing that you guys are all mostly probably also into cow protection, I thought you might find that interesting. Well, there was a cartoon that a devotee made when I first joined. And it was, it was a stick figure, simple cartoon. But the content of it was, there was a devotee at the airport, and he was meeting somebody, handing him a book. And then he was saying to them, you could see the bubble, that was saying what he was saying to the person. And, and he was saying, yeah, Lord Brahma has 4 heads, and Tim and Gillifish swallow whales whole. and then there was a ... because it was what the other person was thinking. It was just, all question marks and bewildered looking faces. And so when we tell people that the Lord incarnated as a hog, the Lord of all creation incarnated as a boar, it's pretty exotic. It's pretty wild. And it's almost like, even you tell a seasoned devotee that, the mind wants to find some sort of a pratikvad, some kind of a symbolic explanation, because just that shameless statement, we believe that the Lord incarnates as a hog. And then, the Leela itself gets even more challenging. And then he picked up the earth from the ocean because it slipped out of orbit, according to Prabhupada, because of the gold rush committed by Hiranyaksha. It's not in the Bhagavatam per se, but it's there in Prabhupada's purports. It may also be there in one of the Tikakar's purports, one of the commentators. But you could just, the more detail you get into with the story, the more difficult it is to conceive of or communicate to people. Vishnu incarnates as a hog, and the earth slipped out of orbit because too much gold was being mined from it, and it fell into the water, and the Lord had to pick it out with his tusk. I saw the flyer. The flyer had, myself as Bhumi Devi. My picture was there on Bhumi Devi on the Lord's tusk, which I thought was just a brilliant, a brilliant bit of photoshopping. But yeah, it's so zany and wild. What a Leela. What a challenge to make sense out of it, make it really stick and make sense, without compromising the integrity of our tradition. I mean, obviously, you can go with some symbolism and, try to explain the whole thing away as being merely symbolic. And although we do have pratikvad, or symbolism, in even the Bhagavatam, with the story of Paranjana and some other Leelas, certainly the story of Varahadeva is not conceived of by our tradition as being merely or even primarily symbolic. And so I thought we would try to, in an intellectually respectable way, offer some thoughts about how we can feel confident or we can feel secure in the Bhagavatam's really fantastic story of Varahadeva, and how, without compromising our tradition's integrity, we can defend and promote and speak about this story in a way which is astute and which stands up to a bit of scrutiny. Anyway, that's the kind of task I gave myself today. So I guess the first thing, if I was going to explain this situation to somebody who was not a devotee, or who was a generic theist but was not in our tradition, the first thing I would say is that I don't think that the difficulty in believing in the story of Varahadeva is actually the specifics of the story. I don't think that what's maybe incredulous or what may be difficult to believe in, at least without just turning on. I mean, one way to deal with this is just to commit. This is my tradition. They say this, I accept it. Maybe I can explain it. Maybe I can't. I don't care. This is my tradition. Such a position is probably better than nothing. But it's certainly not going to be very persuasive to other people. It's that sort of blind faith. Put on your blinders. Don't listen to people that have any doubts. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls this a Kanishta Adhikari in his Krishna Samhita. And he speaks of something called Adunika Vad, or the modern method. And he takes the Bhagavatam and subjects it to Adunika Vad in the Krishna Samhita. Anyway, he has a real fascinating take on these three terms, Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttam. But it's somewhat, what do I want to say, anachronistic with the rest of our tradition. It's his own thing. The way those terms are usually conceived of in our tradition, it's either the Bhagavatam's version of Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttam, or it's Rupa Goswami's version of Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttam. And then Krishnadas Kaviraj mixes them together. But the Kanishta devotee has Komala Shraddha, soft faith, and he also doesn't understand the scriptures. He can't argue effectively. The Madhyam devotee has Nishta Shraddha, firm faith, but he still can't argue effectively from the scriptures. The Uttama devotee is Shastra Yukti Nipuna. He's mastered the art of explaining things and resolving things in the Shastra. And I think we all need to get to that level. We all need to at least aspire to get to that level. And we should have the best lines of reasoning and the best arguments possible for all our positions, so that really smart people can become devotees without having to turn off a part of their brain. So, I mean, you could just say, yeah, this is it. We're committed to this. This is our tradition. Another, we'll call it a modification of this argument, would be to say that I may not be able to answer the questions about how the Lord incarnated as a hog, and I may not be able to explain what we mean when we say that the earth fell out of its orbit into the water and had to be pulled out. I may not be able to reconcile all that. But the core issues of our tradition, that I'm consciousness and not the body, that there is a source of all consciousness, which must itself be conscious in order to give rise to me as a conscious individual. Those core elements of our tradition, which is why I became a devotee in the first place, they make sense. And so I might not have explanations for all the bells and whistles, but the core teachings of our tradition have been substantiated to me. And I do feel confident talking about those. And based on my faith in those, then I'm assuming that there's something really wonderful and beautiful about these other things, even if they escape my full, comprehension at this point. And so it's a slightly modified version of blind faith. We'll call it blind faith plus, because you have a core faith and a core reasonability. And based on that, you're able to accept and maybe compartmentalize and put away in your brain for further reflection in the future elements that can't quite make sense, but those elements that don't make sense don't seem to affect the core reasons why you're a devotee. I think that explanation is a better position than just saying my way or the highway. And that's our scriptures say, and you're a demon, you're a pashandi if you don't have faith. Interestingly, if you look at how our tradition, if you look at Manu, and you look at the term astik is used in Manu, It's also there in earlier Sanskrit literature, but the way we use the term astik, which means existing. Astik traditions are traditions that follow the Veda, even if they come to a semi-theistic or pre-theistic or even potentially an atheistic conclusion. There are certain views like atomism, like Vaisheshika, and then Nyaya, which is usually paired with Vaisheshika as its philosophical backdrop, which appear to be largely atheistic. But they're astik because they accept Veda. The Gnostic traditions, the traditions that don't exist, even if they're theistic, they're Gnostic, they are atheistic. We normally translate Gnostic as atheistic. But what it really means is they don't accept the Veda. And so when Manu defines these terms, what is orthodox and what is heterodox, what is legitimate and what is illegitimate, what is theistic and what is atheistic, it's based on adherence to the Vedas. And the second description, it offers a statement of faith to our scriptures that's not merely just because it says so. And we switch the battleground to things that we feel more confident to discuss. Things like the eternality of the soul, the difference between consciousness and matter, the reasonability of believing in a source of all consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. In that sense, we try to put ourselves into an area that we feel more comfortable defending. I largely think that's the I don't have an answer. This is mysterium tremendum. This the great, terrible, terrific mystery that so often gets invoked in sort of enlightened Protestant circles. And so, I don't think it's a really sophisticated position. I don't think it's not where I like to sit, but as a kind of like a bargain basement, bottom line, something that anybody can glom onto relatively easily and at least present something better than just sheer blind faith. Jesus is the only way, says so in the Bible. I won't hear anything otherwise. I think it knocks us up a notch from that. And so I think it bears mentioning because of its the immediacy with which one can attach themselves to it, and that it does, it does steer the discussion where you want to go. Anytime you're debating somebody, there's a place which is good for you to debate from, and there's a place which is difficult to debate from. For instance, if we were talking about, for example, free speech and censorship from the government. If I was for free speech and I was therefore against censorship, I would talk about the First Amendment. I would talk about the history of the world. I would talk about the principle of free speech and the beauty of it and how, one person's art form is another person's, whatever, garbage, but that we have to protect free speech for all. And that includes not censoring people just because we don't agree with their expression. If you were against free speech and you were pro-censorship, then what you would do is you would find the most egregious examples of free speech gone awry. And you would force people to look at haunting images and say, do you think a child should see this? Do you think a child should watch this? And you would look for really specific examples that are just indefensible, that are allowed in the name of free speech. And the debate would go back and forth where the person for free speech would say, I hate those images, but the principle of free speech remains. And he would pull it back into the principle discussion. And the person who was against free speech would never stay there. He would continually pull you into, look at this image, look at this image, look at this image. Do you think a child should see that? Do you think, that should be freely available? What do you think is going to happen to the world? And each party would try to pull the other one into their universe where they feel strong. The best debaters can walk into the arena that favors their interlocutor, the person they're debating with, and they can still win there. Like a boxer who out-wrestles a wrestler. Beating him by boxing is easy. But if a boxer out-wrestles the wrestler, then it's like he beats him anywhere that the combat goes, you're able to outpace, beat out your opponent from a strength, from dexterity, on the ground, on the feet. And so the strongest position for us is where we don't have to explain the orbit of the earth and too much gold being taken from the earth and the Lord in the form of a pig. That image is just, it's like mind blowing. It's like it's even heavier than the Egyptian, the Egyptian deities. They're anthropomorphic deities, half man, half animal deities. It's really mind blowing. So one way to settle the debate where we want to go, to put it where we want to be, is to say, I didn't become a Hare Krishna because I was really into Varahadeva. I became a Hare Krishna because I'm not the body, because I believe in a merciful, loving deity, because I believe in a relationship with the deity based on love instead of fear, because I believe in a masculine and feminine conception of the absolute, because I believe that the source of all conscious must be conscious, because I believe that a God worth worshiping would be available for the price of a song. That all God would really want from us is our love. The kirtan is a beautiful way to hack through the ritualism of the world and get right to the core of what spirituality has always been and will always be about. That's pulling someone into an arena where we're really strong. And that's usually what you want to do when you debate. For me, I want to actually deal with Varahadeva, and I want to try to make Varahadeva sound reasonable, because it's more challenging, because it's more difficult. It's a bigger win for me. If we can make Varahadeva sound reasonable, that's a good day. So even though I don't like leading with Brahma has four heads and Tim and Gillfish swallow whales whole, nonetheless, if it's in our tradition, we are Mimamsakas. We might be the Uttara Mimamsakas. We're the later hermeneutic tradition, but we're a tradition which prides itself on being able to understand our scriptures and masterfully explain them to anybody who will give us a minute. So first thing, I got blind faith. I'm a Hare Krishna. Don't challenge me. I'll punch you in the face. I'm the Hare Krishna version of a low-level Christian. It says so in our books, therefore it's true. And if you say it's not, you're a demon. Step up from that is you pull the person where you want to be. As part of that, pulling the person where you want to be, we can make the point that the real problem that I have with Varahadeva is I don't really understand what it means to believe in an omnipotent, omnibenevolent deity. An omnipotent deity can become an avatar. Avatar is it's an interesting word in Sanskrit. Tar, like Taraka Brahmanam, like the name that delivers you. And so Tara means to cross. Like Krishna says, Sarva Durgani Tarishasi, you will cross over all difficulties. Mat prasada, by my grace. And so Ava means down as a prefix, and Tar means to cross. So the avatar is when the deity crosses down into this world, when the Lord appears in the world of matter. Now, it might seem impossible because the material world is made out of matter. And therefore, how can spirit appear in matter? Of course, well, we are an instance of spirit appearing in matter. So consciousness can appear in matter. We're an instance of consciousness appearing in matter. If somebody wants to debate on the irreducibility of consciousness, the nature of consciousness as a basic quantum of existence, something that cannot be reduced to chemical states, that's an argument we'd love to have. But assuming we'd be able to overcome that hurdle of somebody being a pure physicalist and give a reasonable explanation for consciousness appearing in this world, we now have a world which isn't just material. Our world is actually material and spiritual. We don't really live in the material world because we're spirit. And so the world in which we find ourselves is not material. It's a world where spirit and matter come together. And so we are an instance of spirit appearing in matter, but when we appear in matter, we become covered. An omnipotent Supreme Lord would be able to appear in this world without becoming covered. That's the very meaning of omnipotence. An omnibenevolent deity would want to appear in this world to help without compromising our free will. We'd have to establish that a world with free will, the possibility of suffering, but the possibility of love is better than a world with no free will, where there's no possibility of suffering, but there's also no possibility of love, which depends on freedom. And so now you've got a world with an omnipotent, omnibenevolent deity. The omnibenevolent deity would want to come into this world to help out without compromising our free will. And an omnipotent deity could come into this world without compromising his spirituality. And in fact, we are an instance, to some extent, without compromising our spirituality. We appear in this world of matter. We are covered, but we're not really covered. That's why our scriptures speak of things like sukham atmani vindati, finding happiness within yourself, antar jyoti, light within yourself, antar sukha, happiness within yourself. Because ultimately, your spirituality never becomes molecularly compromised. And even if you appear to be dirty and unpotable, covered with a material body, ultimately through proper distillation, because there's been no molecular contamination, you can be returned to your original pristine state. In a lot of ways, that's where our tradition differs from Western spirituality. When I say Western spirituality, I mean Islam and Christianity, that make up about 2/3 of the world's population. About 5 billion people in the world are Christians or Muslims, 3 and 2. And 99% of them believe in what would be called a corrupt soul theology, that the soul, because of mistakes made by Adam and Eve, is fundamentally broken. And that only through the vicarious atonement of another and a blessing from their prophet can you be made whole. Otherwise, you are fundamentally contaminated with immortal sin. And so our tradition is different. We would have what would be called a pure soul theology, where our concept of self is that the self is by nature pure. And even if we appear in the world of matter, we never really become fully compromised by that. And that's why spirituality becomes a process of rejuvenation and getting back, what we've always had, remembering who we really are. So I think, the avatar, the idea of the avatar, the idea that God appears in this world from time to time in a spiritual form that defies the laws of matter, that is an instance of spirit appearing within matter, but not covered. I think that idea is obvious if you believe in an all-good, all-powerful deity. An all-good deity would want to help out, an all-powerful deity could help out. And through that little process of explanation, we've now moved from, I believe I'm not the body and I believe there's a God, to I believe in avatars. And that's an important jump, because now I'm not just saying, hey, I know it sounds wacky, this whole Varahadeva thing, but the Hare Krishnas told me I'm not the body, and that's a cool point. And they told me that God exists, and that's a cool point. So even though they got these wacky ideas like God appears as a pig, I'm going to just go ahead and be okay with it, because they've earned my trust with the you're not the body and God existing. We've now begun to build a bridge to where we want to go. It's not just you're not the body and there's a God. It's that the avatar makes sense. It's that the avatar makes sense. And so we've moved a big step closer to Varahadeva. I want to stop here for just a second. It's a little, I feel like I'm getting slightly heady. I've been trying to move slow and substantiate all my points, but I wanted to give you guys a chance, just because there's a small group of us and the forum is inviting for this. Do you guys want to give me some feedback? Do you Prabhus and Madhajis want to give me some feedback? And maybe if I said something that doesn't make sense, or something that you liked, something you want to hear more on, if you didn't follow my train of thought, if it wasn't reasonable.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. No, I really, this has been wonderful so far. Very, even someone with a dull brain like mine, you've just very systematically and thoroughly taken us this far. So now I'm at the edge of my seat.
I'm just getting started. I want to get us all the way to Varahadeva. Makes perfect sense. That's my goal. So I'm setting myself up for failure. It's like I want to hit a grand slam home run. And so, but we're off to the races. We've at least rounded the first base. And we've moved from a general appreciation for our core teachings to the reasonability of the avatar.
This is all well and dandy for devotees who have the basic blind faith that you talk about. But how do you convince anybody else? Even devotees have a hard time understanding why would Krishna appear as a fish or a turtle or a hog.
I haven't gotten there yet. This is part one. We rounded the first base. I got to get around the second, third, all the way home. And what you're talking about is those bases. So I'm just getting to first base. I'm just getting on base right now. I got to turn somehow my bunt single into a home run. But that's I'm setting myself up for that. But if somebody was to say, well, I don't believe in God, great. Then let's not talk about Varahadeva. Let's talk about why you don't believe in God. Why I don't believe in consciousness being an irreducible facet of reality. Great. Then let's talk about that. We'll get to Varahadeva afterwards. And so Varahadeva makes sense if you understand that you are consciousness, that there's a source of all consciousness, that source itself is conscious and individual, that source is omnibenevolent and omnipotent. And then we have a few further things to do. But if you don't buy into those things, then there's no need to go further. We stop. Like, how do I explain this? If a police officer is arresting you and they have a game plan, they're going to put you in cuffs, put you in the back of the car, drive you down to the jailhouse, put you into central processing. Forgive me, but this is the example I came up with in my mind like 1 second ago. So that's that. They got a game plan. They have a whole game plan for what they're going to do with you. If you refuse to let them put cuffs on you, they're still going to do their whole game plan, but they're going to wrestle you to the ground and force the cuffs on you. And that wrestling you to the ground might involve tasing you, might involve 2 police officers. One goes high, one goes low. They might have 4 police officers, one holding down one limb. They bend your arm behind your back. They're going to do whatever they need to do to get the first compliance. They're not going to put you in the car without cuffs on. They're not going to take you down and process you without putting you in the car. And everything's going to go in order. And so I try to take us a couple of steps down the road. Anytime, Sarvatmaji, someone says, well, I don't believe in all good God. I don't believe in all powerful God. Great. Then that's the debate we're going to have now. And until we get over that debate, I'm going to refuse to talk to you about anything further. Did you follow that?
It certainly did. Although I had a different understanding as I was invited to speak about the Dasa avatars at a college class in Tallahassee. And I had no idea how the students would get to first base. I was supposed to speak about Dasa avatar. So when I read in the Bhagavatam that there was a benediction after the end of each Leela, then I just basically studied them and repeated them and just hope for the best. You know, if you don't understand it, at least you get the benedictions. Anybody who hears faithfully, and they didn't interrupt me. So that's how I got to second base, I would say. And actually, they were mesmerized. They couldn't understand a thing, but they were fascinated by it.
You're fascinating. And so you could teach them how to make, I don't know, peanut brittle. And people would be like, wow, that was mesmerizing. I don't have that natural charisma. And so I have to make sense. Otherwise, I get tomatoes thrown at me.
So I don't have to make sense?
You don't have to make sense because you're so charismatic. You can just do anything.
I have control over the keyboard, so please stop before I just erase you from this.
So we are conscious. We have a source. That source is conscious. It's also omnipotent. It's also omnibenevolent. I can argue for those points if somebody wants to make me. I can argue why the source of all creation is going to be omnipotent and even omnibenevolent. There are good arguments for that stuff. And that omnibenevolent, omnipotent deity would naturally appear in this world without compromising our free will. And now the question becomes, what form would that deity appear in the world in? And we have an answer. We say Krishna appears in every species, in every form of life, even as a plant, even as an animal. Now, this is where you get into Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophy Society. The Theosophy Society is kind of a wacky, syncretistic blend of low-level Hinduism and Egyptian thought from non people who don't understand the original language. And the Theosophy Society was formed in 1875 in New York by Madame Blavatsky and a couple of her cohorts. And they got popular. She moved to India and lived in India for the remainder of her life eventually. And they grew. Annie Besant became a big theosophist, and they had a bunch of temples. They actually had a big place down in San Diego. They're super small now, but they had their heyday. People thought they were all the rage, and they were largely responsible for introducing people in the early 20th century to Hinduism. And they were very pro-India, pro-Swaraja, self-rule for India, anti-colonialism. They were huge fans of the Vedas. Their logo has a big swastika on it because their society existed before Hitler and before the Nazi regime, and so they got a big swastika. Sometimes when you go to our temple in Vrindavan, and you'll see Radha Shyam Sundar wearing a swastika outfit where they're wearing chadar and dhoti, which is massive swastikas on it, because that symbol's been around for so long. Anyway, the Theosophist, Madame Blavatsky, in 1877, she came up with a really far out idea. And you got to remember, Darwin had published his Evolution of Species about 18 years prior. And in 1877, Madame Blavatsky came up with this idea that the Das avatar is linked to evolutionary theory, aquatics, to reptiles, Matsyakurma, to mammals, Varaha, to upright animals, Narasimha, kind of a missing link, to barbarians or Neanderthals, Parshuram, to civilized man, Ram, to aesthetic, like an aesthetic cow herding agrarian society, cultivating ethics and morals, Krishna, to wisdom, Buddha, and to destruction, Kalki. And Krishna and Balaram get in there together. That's how you get to 10. And so she came up with this, which is fascinating. It's totally wild to think about the various species in a hierarchy, or what's called a scala naturae, the natural order of things that goes all the way back to Aristotle. And that you can look at anything and taxonomize and categorize it and view it in a way which is meaningful and adds value to it. And that somehow the Das avatar matched up perfectly with Darwinian's evolutionary theory. And it accounted for all the basic, what do I want to say, thresholds of evolution within the animal kingdom. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had a conversation in 1929 that was recorded by his disciples who scribed and wrote down what he said. And Professor Southers came from Ohio State University to Calcutta, met with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and they had a conversation. And he asked him about all these animal incarnations and how they just sounded bizarre. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati quoted Madame Blavatsky in a negative way, but did appear to co-opt and use her basic schema. Again, she spoke this before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was even born. So she gets credit for being the origin of it. And he criticized her. And in that very same, statement where he criticized her to Professor Southers, he co-opted and borrowed this basic theory. And he said that the Das avatar represents different levels of the soul's evolution in a relationship with God. And that Krishna incarnates in all these animal forms to teach us about varying degrees of relationship between the soul and God. And as the soul evolves towards intimate, ecstatic, romantic love, they evolve through the various avatars up to Krishna, who is the zenith and the apex. He offered that explanation, which totally blew Professor Southers' mind. And that was the hinge. All the questions up till that point were all challenging, and all the questions after that point were submissive. Eventually, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said to him, "Oh, you will have to pay the preceptorial fee if you want to hear more of submission and inquiry and service, which are the three things from the Gita: pariprashna and seva and pranipat, respect and questions and service. Krishna says three things you have to go to your guru with. And so Bhakti says, you will have to pay the preceptorial fee, the teacher fee. And the teacher fee, he then defined what it was, and that was the end of the conversation. But the entire conversation changed when he invoked this explanation of the Das avatar, which made even the radical Christian anthropomorphist of Professor Southers impressed. Just the genius of it. And so he took Blavatsky's attempt to reconcile with Darwin, and he took it a step further, and he said it's different forms to help people come closer to an intimate relationship with the divine. Which then brings us to our anthropomorphic conception of divinity. Krishna as a human being. I think to appreciate Varahadeva, if we can appreciate the human form of God, it'll also help us appreciate the animal form of God. Give me a little bit of room here. If intimate love for God is your goal. And that's a relatively easy thing for me to argue for. That God exists, that intimate love is possible, and that love is better than fear. And that intimate love is better than formal love. And we can move from Vishnu to Krishna, or we can move from like a our father to our child. We can move from a parent deity to a child deity, from a masculine deity to a feminine deity. We can move from an angry God to a loving God. We can move from a relationship of Dasa to a relationship of romance. Those things are really easy to do. Once we get to the argument that an intimate love of God is the goal, then God has to be human. Because can you fall romantically in love with something that's not human? Think about it for a minute. The answer is no. The answer is no. I mean, obviously, people have sex with animals. It's called bestiality. And so I'm not saying that somebody couldn't like copulate with an animal. I'm saying romantic love, which is based on equality, a lack of hegemony. It's based on people being able to understand you, you being able to understand them, deep empathy, human communication. No, animals don't have recursion in their language. We can say easily, I went to the store with my friend last night to buy this for that party at this time in this neighborhood on the street in this city. That's recursion. Every time I take a prepositional phrase and link it to the preceding idea and come up with more and more complicated thoughts, animals can't do that. Because we have that capacity, someone we're going to love intimately has to have that capacity as well. Otherwise, there's a massive hegemony between us, a power differential between us and the thing we love. And the love becomes much more one-sided, much less rewarding. You love what you're like. Intimate love, romantic love, ecstatic love can only be with another human. Therefore, we need to envision God as human-like if romantic, intimate love is our goal. That doesn't necessarily mean that God is human-like. It just means that we need to envision God as such for the purpose of cultivating an intimate love. Now we got to jump from where it's what we need to do to it's actually what it is. We are the only species that has the capacity to ask massive questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? We're the only species that has the ability to love God intimately. And therefore, an omnipotent and omnibenevolent deity would naturally make us closely enough resembling him so that we could cultivate intimate love. Therefore, God doesn't have an anthropomorphic form, a human-like form. Rather, we have a theomorphic form. We were created in the image of God so that we could fulfill our purpose, which was to love God, which is the special dispensation of human beings. And therefore, we were created in a form that was similar enough to God's where it would be easy for us to cultivate intimate love. In fact, if the deity did not do that, he wouldn't be all good. If he couldn't do that, he wouldn't be all powerful. Therefore, an omnipotent and omnibenevolent deity requires that he would gift human beings with the capacity to love him intimately, which would mean our form would have to be like his enough that we could do so. That was a bombshell, guys. That was second base. And I'm, whatever. I'm smart enough that I can listen to myself while I talk. And I think I made those points reasonably well. I'm not saying that they can't be challenged. But I feel like we've now moved forward from I believe in God, and so I'm letting the Hare Krishnas do their Varahadeva freak out thing, to I believe in an avatar, and so I'm letting the Hare Krishnas do their freak out thing, to the idea of Krishna as a human is actually astute and reasonable. And there is some method and some beauty and some amazingness in the schema of the Das avatars that warrants further investigation because it seems to represent all the forms of life we find in the world. You guys want to give me some feedback?
I just want to go back to the dog thing. Dogs have unparalleled, loyal love for their owners, even sometimes to risk their own lives to save their owners' children, whereas humans have reservations. So how can you say that humans love is more developed than a dog that will give his own life to save the master's child without expecting a reward?
I'll repeat the second time. I got to the first time. Thank you for that question. And certainly loyalty from the dog, we even get from the Bhagavatam. And so, although interestingly, Prabhupada in the purports to the Varahadeva section, he says that dogs are a condemned species because they're not even nice to each other. And the species is condemned that they can't even be nice to each other. And dogs are the primary example of this because dogs fight with each other. That was his argument. So you can take that up with him if you want to, but I'm just saying he said that. As far as loyalty from dogs, yeah, I mean, you can learn, prostitutes have something to teach us. You can learn stuff from ants. You can learn stuff from every species of life. You can learn things from every experience, good, bad, and ugly. And so I don't doubt that there are things we can learn from dogs. However, I would say this, your hegemonic relationship with your dog, and I don't believe you have a dog, but if you did, your hegemonic relationship with your animal means that he's really a slave who depends on you for food and has no free will. And so what you're perceiving of love, you're like a slave owner who says, yeah, my slaves love me. And you just, by making this argument, and of course I'm not talking to you, Prabhu, you're my elder, I love you to the moon and back. And so, but just because you asked the question in a challenging way, I'm going to respond back as if I was talking to you, although I'm not talking to you. But with that disclaimer in place, I'm going to go ahead and try to cut your head off right now. So but it's like with great respect, but I'm going to, without further ado, proceed in as aggressive a way as I see fit to make my point as succinctly as I can.
I expect not less from you.
All right. You're like a slave owner, a scumbag slave owner who thinks his slaves love him and impregnates his slaves and thinks he's doing them a favor. Your dog doesn't love you. He's your slave. He's got some kind of, what do I want to call it? Instinct to serve his master. That's not love, brother. You don't understand love. Love is based on freedom. That's why Krishna's not even really omnipotent. We have free will. Therefore, Krishna's not really omnipotent because he can't control our love. That's why bhakti controls Krishna. Freedom, free will is required as a precursor to love. Anytime you wind up in a hegemonic relationship with too great a power differential, there is no possibility of love. And what you're seeing is a slavish mentality, an instinctual mentality that's bred into animals through domestication over tens of thousands of years. And just due to your ignorance, you're mistaking it for love.
Let me throw a monkey wrench here. What about the Stockholm Syndrome?
Mr. Stockholm Syndrome. Yes, sir. What do you got?
Well, there is free will. There's
One thing is this. Don't make me go 5 rounds with you because I still got to get through the rest of the class. So if I gave you a reasonable answer to what you said, let's not do like 3 or 4 rounds of it because I still got to get through the rest of the class.
Okay. Just one more. Okay. Just the Stockholm Syndrome. There is not a dog. It's a human who falls in love with his captor, with his enslaver. And you said, well, the dog doesn't have a choice, doesn't have free will, but the human that falls in love with the captor or the kidnapper does have free will. So how do you reconcile that?
This. even with human beings who have free will, in too strong of a power differential relationship, they can be tricked out of their free will. That's the whole point about torture. That's the whole point about like why that's why therapists can't sleep with their patients. That's why people have to have integrity, because when you have a child who on some level has free will and you abuse them, they have no freedom to stop that. And even with a human being who should have the ability to not have that happen to them, even if it gets taken away from them. And we don't consider those people to be responsible for what happened in such circumstances. And Stockholm Syndrome is a real thing that you find in the DSM, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, because it's a real thing that happens. And we have laws to protect people from like workplace violence, workplace abuse, parental abuse. We have a whole system of laws. And like in every state in this country, plus federal laws on top of them, if the state laws aren't aggressive enough to protect people. Welcome to the civil rights movement, man. I mean, I know you're from like Argentina, and you guys are about as backwards as they get, but it's like welcome to like post 1965. And so if even human beings can be robbed of their freedom, what to speak of animals? You actually made my argument for me. You just defeated yourself twice. And hey, this is I'm just letting that jack out of the box just a little bit. I'm kind of built for debate, and I know that you're my friend, and I know you just asked us to give me a platform to speak. I'm sure that you could defeat me on this point and run circles around me, but just let me off the hook and let me move forward. But if somebody was to argue, I would say they actually prove my point by pointing out how power differentials can even rob human beings of their freedom, what to speak of animals who never have it in the first place. And by the way, that's why if you see an animal trying to rape another animal in the park, you don't call the police. That's why animals don't get karma, because they're running on instinct. And that's why when you start to get to these animals that are capable of metacognition, like dolphins, they start to do wild stuff, like commit suicide in captivity. They start to kind of jump that hump, and they become more people, more capable of free action, more responsible for their actions. And so even human beings, when robbed of their freedom and put into a slave situation, they end up with this kind of Stockholm Syndrome, sometime over centuries. And what to speak of animals who never had a fair shake. All right, just getting back to what I said, I tried to make an argument here for the naturalness and the brilliance of us being theomorphic, and how an omnipotent, omnibenevolent deity would have to make us in his image because we have the capacity for cultivating romantic and ecstatic love. I see Agari Krishnadas and Queenie Nguyen. And so let's go with Queenie Nguyen first. Did I pronounce that right? Is it Nguyen? That's how you say it, right?
Close. Yeah. It's Nguyen.
Say it one more time.
Nguyen.
Nguyen?
Yes. Wow, you're so good at that. So
hey,
yeah.
Please, Queenie Nguyen, please.
Thank you, Babu. It was so fascinating when you share about the evolutionary of the avatar. And I was curious, where does Lord Chaitanya fit in that?
Lord Chaitanya is a masculine and feminine deity, God falling in love with himself. It goes beyond even Krishna. Krishna is God as Cupid, because ultimately God's a lover above all things. Lord Chaitanya is Krishna trying to understand the love of his dearest devotee, Srimati Radharani. It's the Lord taking on a feminine form, a feminine mindset. Radha Bhava Dyuti Suvalitam. Naomi Krishna Swarupam. I'm offering my obeisance to Krishna, who's adorned with the sentiments and complexion of Radharani. That's why Lord Chaitanya is golden. He's Krishna falling in love with himself as the last evolute of divinity. beyond perfection. Because the Lord can't love himself because he is himself. And love is this miraculous thing that ties two people together and binds them, but it depends on them being different. There has to be a mother and a child in order for love to bind them together. And so the Lord wanted to know what it was like to love himself. And therefore he became his greatest devotee, modeled himself after Radharani. Then Radharani even came along for the ride, and that's Gadadhar. And so Lord Chaitanya, Gaur Gadadhar, these are further evolutions in that basic schema that are mind-blowing in their beauty. Mind-blowing. They'll spend lifetimes meditating on that and never come to the end of it. What a nice question. Thank you. I feel so inspired by that question. Thank you very much. Agari Krishnadas.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for that very astute presentation on Varahadeva's ontology.
Oh, I haven't even started Varahadeva yet. This is all the warm-up. I'm trying to put the pieces of the puzzle in play. So when we actually go for Varahadeva, we got the building blocks so it'll work. But please continue.
Yeah, so my question relates to what you're saying about when you're defining Nashtik and Ashtik. And I was just thinking about faith, in that as devotees, we can get caught up in the ritualistic side of devotional service. And we might not even see it as a blind spot that suppose we've been asked to take more responsibility in the mission. And we say, oh, we accept Varahadeva, we accept the Lord can incarnate as an animal. But it's a bit like how the Christians accept in a blind way. We don't actually, we haven't fully intellectualized it. And that may show itself in terms of, for example, the personal struggle I had, coming to Gita Nagari was just adapting to this kind of work, farming work and just the environment. And you're praying to the deities every day for empowerment to be able to, execute your sadhana more efficiently, work more efficiently, but you're constantly feeling tired, etc., etc. So, yeah, my question relates to how do we identify some blind spots in our faith and Shraddha, where we may say, oh, we accept fully the theology of Krishna consciousness, but the spiritual master is challenging us, oh no, you should take more of the mission. And can I use that as an indicator to show that I haven't actually fully internalized?
I followed you.
Yeah.
You're smart and you're young, which means you kind of do a little bit of this. You reach around your hand and touch your nose. It'll work itself out as you get older. It's fine. But you're smart. You're really smart. I don't want to stray too much into what you said because I want to stick to Varahadeva and try and get through at least a little bit more and get a little closer. I also I read all 7 chapters of the Bhagavatam that deal with Varahadeva. So I like to tell the story of Varahadeva. But I wanted to get us to a place where I felt like we could really appreciate it first. But just because you said something and you're smart and I appreciated what you said, I don't know that your spiritual master gets to change your nature. So I don't know that your guru necessarily knows what's best for you. So you have a nature. If your nature isn't to be on a farm and you're stuck on a farm, you're going to be miserable. And I think that, you should figure out what your nature is. And I think talking to elders will be part of that. But the idea that your guru tells you your nature and then you spend the rest of your life praying to the deities to help you with your service, even though you're totally dissatisfied doing it, I'm not exactly sure that's the jam. So there are some premises and presuppositions in what you've said that I wouldn't agree to. If my guru sent me to Gita Nagari and I was on the farm and I was miserable, I'd say, hey, Gurudev, I'm miserable on this farm. I did a year because you told me to, and I'll stand on my head for a year if you tell me to. But in terms of this is my life's work, I'm not seeing it. Was this just was this just for some purification, or you actually think I'm a farmer? Because I don't feel like a farmer. This idea that, you're not supposed to ask any questions or have your own thoughts, or your input's not supposed to be a factor in determining what service is best for you. I think that's a really immature understanding of spiritual life. Now you're young. How old are you?
I'm 32.
Yeah. So if you weren't immature, there'd be something wrong. I'd be worried about you. And so, but you're not super immature, so you should be able to appreciate the wisdom in what I'm saying. So are there times to, it's interesting, you know, the verse in the Gita, which is spoken twice, is Mamana Bhava Mad Bhakto. Krishna says it twice. But the other one, which is spoken twice, is Shreya Swadharma Viguna Parodharma Swanushtita. Better to do your own duty falsely than somebody else's perfectly. And so a big thing we got to figure out in life is, how am I built? For example, I'm going to get to you in just a second. You showed my, give me a second. I am a violent man. I like to wrestle. I like to box. That's my nature. And when I don't engage in physical culture, and I don't challenge myself like that on a regular basis in a healthy way, I start to get angry. And I start to feel a lot of rage welling up inside me. Now, I think Krishna consciousness is working because I'm chilling out. My son's just telling me it's a low test because I'm getting old. And so they're coming for me on the wrestling mat. They're coming for me in the boxing gym. And they mock me that I'm just getting old and I got low test. And that's what's going on. I'm not actually a sadhu. I think water's wearing away the stone. But I understand my nature. I'm comfortable with it. I like to argue. I'm good at it. I cultivate it. I'm comfortable with that. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not trying to be Radhanath Swami. I follow Radhanath Swami, but I'm me. Radhanath Swami should ask me to stand on my head. I'd do it. Tell me to jump, I'd say how high. But he's never told me to do something which is against my nature. And if he did, I'd probably question him on it. Is being on a farm against your nature? I don't know. You got to answer that. I don't know you well enough to know. Could you have doubts that being on a farm is your nature, but it is actually your nature? Yeah. Could there be some masterful thing? Sure. Could your Guru Maharaj have thrown you there lazily because he needs a body to fill the space, even though it's not ultimately in your best interest? Absolutely. Could he need for you to tell him that? Yes. I'm cool with all of that. I'm cool with Krishna sent you there. And you're going to realize in due course of time, I'm cool with your Guru Maharaj wasn't looking out for you. He was just filling a gap, and part of your service was to go there and serve him, but you might not be able to last there for very long. I'm cool with all that, either one of those polarities and everything in between. I'm okay with that. Krishna wants to know what you want to do for him, with that synergistic understanding of your relationship with your Guru Jana. You can do it respectfully, but you got to ultimately find a place where you're comfortable. I love to argue. I don't get flustered. I get better. The more heated it gets, I get better. If it turns into a fight, that's even better for me. If I'm arguing with somebody and then they want to fight with me, I'm happy. It's never happened in my life with a devotee, ever. But you understand, that's my nature. I feel comfortable in that milieu. You get it? You got to figure out where you feel comfortable and then find a way to do that as your service to Krishna. All right, let me just take a look at Yashoda Mai real quick. Okay, thank you, Yashoda Mai. Yeah, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I feel validated. Thank you very much for saying that. She said, thank you. We need to mature and we need to have some dialogue. And in the same way, there's synergy between us and the deity in the form of love, and our love is meaningful to Krishna. There's also friendship and synergy between us and our Gurujana. It's not just a one-way relationship. All right. I don't know how much more I want to do. We've gone for an hour and 15 minutes. I think I'm just going to move real fast now. And so I tried to move slow, but we've had a little bit of interaction. And so I'm going to move fast now just so I complete the class. Kurma was discovered by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in 1881. He gave the deity along with first initiation to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. A lot of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's followers say that Kurma is in charge of water. Water is rasa. And therefore, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, by worshiping that Kurma deity, learned about rasa. This is an example of how we can look at the Das avatars and see them as being different elements, which will eventually get us towards our rasic relationship with Krishna. We have to be human beings. Krishna has to have a human-like form because we were made to love him in a human-like way. And all the Das avatars help us in that relationship, move us towards that relationship. I got an omnipotent deity who's also omnibenevolent, and the world had a need. The world had a need. What was the need? The earth had been devastated. There's two descriptions. One is from Swayambhu Manu, and the other one is from Chakshusha Manu. And so there's these two different manvantars. One of them, the creation taking place. The other one, Hiranyaksha had been a little bit too involved. They got merged together in the Bhagavatam. But what happened was something had gone wrong with the earth. And the Lord needed to appear. And the devotees were contemplating, how can we fix this situation? And the Lord came out of Brahma's nose. Could an omnipotent deity come out of his nose? Sure. He was tiny, the size of the upper part of your thumb. A moment later, he was the size of a stone. A moment later, he was the size of an elephant in the sky. He dove into the water. The water created two waves, which were like arms, as if the ocean was praying, please don't rip me apart. Praying to Varahadeva, who was sacrifice personified. He was in the form of a pig, but he himself was the personification of the sacrificial arena. His tongue was the sacrificial plate. His eyes were the ghee, etc., etc. And so he himself, it's like amazing. The Lord in a quote unquote dirty form, smelling, looking for the earth with his snout, was still the personification of all sacrifices. Could an omnipotent Lord do that? Sure. The earth needed to be picked up. Hogs pick things up. The Lord has a sense of humor. So he showed up as a hog. He showed up as a boar. You know what's more miraculous than that? That God exists, that God loves us, that God's a person, that we can love God intimately, that we can love God romantically, that we can dance with and kiss God, that we can feed God from our breast as our child. Those things are infinitely more fantastic. If Krishna's a person, some of what he does is just because he's got a sense of humor, he's got some panache. And so he showed up in a form which is normally dirty, and that form was picking things up out of a dirty place, but that form remained completely pure while he was doing it. I mean, honestly, it's like kind of brilliant. Krishna's got a totally wild sense of style and swagger and humor. He manages to incarnate in every species which ever existed. So every level of evolution has some access, has some ability to connect to him. And in the human form of life, we can develop intimate love. Let's forget that he incarnates in the form of a boar. He incarnates in every form imaginable. We are so much more cool than everybody else with their human-like deities. That's all they've got. We got human-like, we got plant, we got animal, we got everything in between. We're the coolest. And as long as you understand the personality of Godhead and free will that the Lord also has, and panache, then it makes perfect sense. What's the Lord doing? He's answering the prayers of the devotees. What's he doing? He's saving them in a miraculous way, which blows their minds in a way they could never imagine happening. And then there's an obstacle. And you know, Vidura asked Maitreya, what happened with Hiranyaksha? And then Vidura asks Maitreya, and then Maitreya gives this beautiful explanation of Vaikuntha, which sounds a lot like Vrindavan. Beautiful explanation of Vaikuntha and how Vijay got cursed, and how the four Kumars cursed them, and how the Lord appeared. The Lord was so kind when he appeared. When Jai and Vijay were cursed, the Lord said, "They're my servants, therefore it's as if I have offended you, and I'm ready to cut off my arm if it's offending to you. You please forgive me." The Lord to the four Kumars is saying he'll cut off his arm if he's offended them, and that his servants, and the four Kumars were so bewildered they could not even understand what the Lord was saying. Did he want them to curse? Did he not want them to curse? And the Lord had a plan, and that plan coincides with our karma. Karma has to go on, and Krishna manages to find a way to insinuate himself into our karma so that there's always the option of us turning towards him. And so Jai and Vijay come into this world to fulfill the curse. They end up becoming instruments for the karma of the world, and the Lord impregnates himself into that whole equation and opens doors and solves problems. The devotees can see it. The weak devotees have doubts, which is also okay. At least they're devotees. Some of the demigods were wondering, like they were scared. Varahadeva dropped his club at one point and they freaked out. Narasimha one time grabbed a hold of Hiranyakashipu and he broke free, and the demigods freaked out. They didn't get it. Ultimately, how did Krishna kill him? He just like touched him behind the ear. There was like this whole mace fight and tridents and chakras going on. But how was Hiranyaksha ultimately killed? The Lord just hit him with his hoof, just right behind the ear, and he fell dead. Like just a glancing blow. And so there's really valuable lessons to learn here. That Krishna always appears, that Krishna's got more style than you could ever imagine, that Krishna's everywhere in all things. You're never forsaken, that he'll do anything for his devotees, that there's a purpose and a plan, and you have to investigate, you have to think about it. Even that your power thought, you still won't quite be able to figure it out. By the Lord's grace, you'll be able to understand that everybody's got their part to play, including the Lord. That we can't define exactly what he's going to do, that the human-like intimate form is more wild and wacky and otherworldly even than the boar form, that incarnating in every form, which is what the Bhagavatam says, there's unlimited incarnations. These are just the primary ones. And so we should be unapologetic. Yeah, Krishna's wild. He has a sense of humor. He wants to prove to us that whatever he's doing is all good. And even in a quote-unquote dirty form, he's still completely pure. That's the lesson to learn. All right, that was me trying to cram everything together in just a couple minutes so we could wrap this up. Any final feedback? And let me just say it one more time. We exist, we're conscious. Consciousness is irreducible. It's a fundamental facet of reality. It does not come from electrochemical synapses going off in your brain. There's no instance where we show that chemicals are conscious. The universe has a source. We see it moving outwards from a central source. Modern physics has taught us that, but that central source must also include consciousness because it's an irreducible basic facet of the world. And just like all the fundamental particles of the world have to be included in that singularity, and the fundamental forces are also included, similarly, consciousness must be included. And that conscious source of the entire world is what we call God. And that deity is omnipotent and omnibenevolent. From that omnipotent and omnibenevolent deity comes the avatar. It must come because the Lord would have to come into society without breaking our free will. And he must come repeatedly. And the Lord's ultimate form must be human-like because we're the only species that can intimately fall in love with the deity. We might have things to learn from all species, but we're the only one that can intimately fall in love with the deity. And therefore we are theomorphic. But Krishna also incarnates in all the Dasa avatars, which perfectly match up with all the basic species you see in the world. And it represents the evolution of the soul towards that intimate relationship with God that we're chasing after, just like Kurma is in charge of the water. So he teaches us about rasa. And there's lessons to be learned worshiping each deity. And even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati worshipped Kurma. And even other people come up with this stuff, and we co-opt it, and we improve it, we make it even better. And so the Lord incarnates in all forms, including plants, including animals, including a boar, including so many things. Why? Because he wants to interact with us, bless every species with a connection, teach us lessons along the way, and show that whatever we think Krishna can do, he's way more far out than we possibly could. And you know what's even more radical than believing he incarnated as a boar? Believing that he exists at all. That he loves us, that we can love him back, that we can dance with him, that we can kiss him and embrace him, that we can cook for him, that we can play with him and wrestle with him and play on his shoulders and feed him from our breast. We've already accepted stuff way more exotic, way more out of this world than anything about Varahadeva. Stand strong, preach our tradition. There's symbolism in there. There's life lessons in there. And we can explain Varahadeva to anybody who wants to listen. We just need a little bit of time, put a few building blocks in place, and not try to limit Krishna with our minds, with our material minds, with our preconceptions, with our blind spots, where we notice one thing that seems a little out there, but we don't notice all the other things that seem out there that we've accepted. And faith is enough interest that you keep doing the experiment. Faith and doubt work great together. They are not antithetical to one another. You can have a little doubt. You need to have enough faith that you keep doing the experiment. Faith is enough interest in a given hypothesis that you do the experiment to see what comes out. And so discussing these things, talking about them has value. Trying to reason through them has value. And this is what I came up with when I thought about today. Any final points?
I have a question about the Lord interjecting our karma. The law of karma seems to be somewhat infallible, that whatever action must have a equal and opposite reaction, and seem to have found a way to interfere in a good way with Jaya and Vijaya's journey, let's say. So does he play favorites? Sometimes, he chooses.
Good question. Let me run with it. Hopefully I'll answer it. Here's my thought. I believe that in a world I believe that an all good deity, an all powerful deity, would have to make a world of karma. Because if there was not a reaction to what you did, there would be no way for you to learn. So Krishna has to make a world of reaction. So there's a possibility of you learning, because there's a logos and there's a reasonability, a logic to the world, so you can navigate it. But it can't be so intense that you're forced to do the right thing. Therefore, our forgetfulness is also an essential feature of an all good, all powerful deity. Because if we remembered everything, we would lose our free will. It would be we'd be able to see what was going to happen, and we wouldn't be able to act freely. It'd be like if the police were standing over you at every moment. So forgetfulness is consistent with an all good, all powerful God, as is the law of karma, as a tacit way of teaching. At the same time, Krishna opens the door for anybody who wants to engage with him, and he then makes himself personally available to that devotee. And the way he does that, he injects himself into their karma and gives them just what they need to teach them a lesson. And that's the experience of devotees. Prabhupada talked about that. He used to, that verse, Tetenu Kampam Sushamik Shamano, he would always translate it like that you get much less than what you deserved. Why is that? Because you've chosen to take another path, which is directly connect with Krishna. And that door is always open to all souls. Therefore, it's not partiality. Therefore, Krishna is equal to all, because that option is always there. But if you want that direct connection with Krishna, that's also available. And that doesn't completely circumvent karma, but it does modify karma, where you get just what you need to learn your lesson, with Krishna showing you along the way and holding you in the palm of his hand. He can't do that as directly for people who don't want him, and therefore he does it indirectly through karma. But for the devotees who open that door, he gets to inject himself more. Just like the rain. that rains on everybody. But if you come outside, you get wet. If you stay under an umbrella, you won't. And so we determine whether or not Krishna is able to interact with us. It's not partiality on his part. It's our free will. That would be how I would reason through that. Did that make sense?
Sure does.
That would, like, if I got 2 minutes to do it, that's how I would do it. Those are like the highlights of what I would do. Yes, sir. I see you. You are Abraham Stokes.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, this was a very nice class. I really appreciate it. I like the point you said about the theomorphic, because we're the only species that can romantically get involved with people. So God wants us to get romantically involved with him and that kind of thing. I like that point. Now, the one before, why is God all benevolent and why is there a God and why is he all benevolent?
I do that now, but I mean, what that looks like is this. There's two arguments that I give generally. I'm going to do them real fast. Omnipotent, because he's the source of all creation, he's a singularity. That's pretty easy. The singularity is the source of all existence. It's the source of the fundamental laws and particles of the world. And now it's also conscious. Now you have an omnipotent deity. You can make an argument for omnibenevolence from omnipotence. If what stops people from doing good is mundane desires that they suffer from, an omnipotent deity wouldn't suffer from those mundane desires, and therefore there'd be no block for him to do good. That's Richard Swinburne's argument. He's a major player at Oxford University. He makes an argument that omnipotence entails omnibenevolence, because an omnipotent being has nothing standing in the way of it doing the right thing, and the things that stand us away doing the right thing are actually bad things and inadequacies we have, but that deity has no inadequacies and therefore can always do the right thing. That's one.
But that accepts that we are naturally good inside. What if the good things are distracting us from our eternally bad qualities as nature?
Yeah, so his argument is predicated on that, on accepting the premise that what stops you from doing good is a mundane quality, that your fundamental nature is good. It depends on the premise. It's not my favorite argument, but it's a powerful argument. Now I have to argue that our basic nature is good and not evil, for sure. I agree with you. I prefer another argument. It's this one. Because we're theomorphic, when we look at human society, we find out something about the nature of God. When we look at life, we find out something general. When we look at human society, we find out something even more. Qualities like empathy, compassion, qualities like love, qualities like selflessness, qualities like kindness are the backbone of progressive civilization. We are distinct from the animal species, and that we can take things from the natural order, which is, might equals right, and we can evolve them to a civilized order, a la social contract theory and John Locke and these guys. That is what makes human society beautiful. That's what makes us thrive. Therefore, those are the natural qualities of God. And by looking at us, who most closely resemble God in this world, we find that the qualities in us that create sustainability are the qualities that are in God. And that's a way to get around the argument you made of a dystheistic deity, which would be just as good, because you basically reversed it. You said that knife could cut this way, could cut this way as well. My argument, the one I just gave, doesn't have that deficiency.
Because it's taking the source from us, not God. We don't get our goodness from God because we're, I see what you're saying.
Well, let me say it again. You missed it, but say it again. I'll just say it real quick. And I don't have enough time to fully flesh it out. We are most like the deity. Therefore, we have to look at ourselves to extrapolate in a non-arbitrary way about the nature of the deity, because what else can you do but investigate and look at the world around you? How else can we, without referring to a scripture or this or that? We have pure logic on one hand and we have observation on the other. Now that we've built a logical argument for us closely resembling the deity, now we can look at human civilization and we find that goodness makes human civilization thrive. And therefore, that's the nature of the deity from whom we come. Did you follow that?
Yeah, somewhat.
Think about it. Come back at me. You can get my phone number from Sarv, Prabhu. If you want to reach out to me again, we could talk about it more. It's a solid argument. It stands up to scrutiny. I'd be happy to flesh it out with you more. Anybody else?
Look at the chat. Queenie has a question.
Yeah, do what I do. Talk to people every day.
How about wrestling and MMA also?
No. I mean that's that's just like a small thing. But the reality is, I joined the Hare Krishnas. They threw me out the airport to distribute books as a 17-year-old. I got defeated every single day by people I was talking to. I could never string two sentences together. I'd go back home and the elders in my community would chastise me for being so weak in my faith and slap me around philosophically and send me back out the next day. And I'd go back out and try to fend for myself again and fail miserably. And over the years, you learn arguments and then you go and represent them to people and you find people to talk to. And pretty soon you know what they're going to say before they say it because you've done it so many times, you know how it works. Pretty soon you're fearless because you have the tools to reason. Take a class in critical thinking, no problem. That's a great thing. Go to a local college, a local online college, and sign up for a critical thinking class. You won't regret it. Sign up for a logic class. You won't regret it. For sure. It's fantastic. Philosophy of religion, another great class take. All that stuff's great. You can also learn it all for free online, like Elon Musk tells you. It's actually true. Everything's on YouTube. Everything's online for free all the time. And then get in the mix and go for it and talk to people. And don't be afraid of doubts. And don't be afraid of asking yourself questions. And have faith that you're going to find reasons. If you ever come across something you can't reason through, give me a call and we'll talk through it. Talk about anything. But how do you get good at arguing? How do you get good at reasoning? You do it every single day and then you get good at it. All right. Is that okay?
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Tradition. We are a tradition of pundits. We are a tradition of learned devotees who are able to explain our sacred texts in a compelling way that is attractive and persuasive to whoever we meet. That is our mission. One person at a time, one day at a time. Cutting through somebody's fog, one person at a time. That is our mandate. That's what our gurus did for us. That's what we have to do for the next generation. Every one of us has to learn how to do that. Some of us might be aggressive like me. Some of us might be a little more chill, like Sarvama Prabhu, everything in between. But all of us have to become brilliant in our own right and learn how to persuasively convince people of the legitimacy of our tradition, even while we embrace and appreciate other traditions. I think that's a great place to stop. Sarvama Prabhu, I'm honored. It's really lovely to be here with all of you. Thank you all so very much.
We want to thank you for addressing us in your inimitable way. And I say this in a very kind way, in a very favorable light. And I hope you do it again sometime. I think we're going to have a repeat. I smell repeat performance. So let me put you on the roster back again sometime later on. And please, devotees, unmute yourself and give Tukaram or a show of how we feel about his addressing us.
Thank you, Tukaram.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thanks, Prabhu.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
And now a message from the sponsors. Thank you for attending this wonderful explanation of I can't even say it, anthropomorphism, divinity, and avatars, and so on. Tomorrow morning, Mukunda Prabhu from South Africa will give the Bhagavatam class. It's usually at 7. And on Monday for Lord Nityananda's Trayodasi, we'll have Sripala Prabhu speak to us from London. That's all for today. Thank you very much, and Hare Krishna. Good night, devotees.